Hello and a warm welcome to the AI with Arun show. Imagine trying to build a modern skyscraper using blueprints drawn up in 1947, written in different languages and requiring 29 separate permits for the foundation, the steel, and the glass. That was India's labor law system, a complex, decades old mess. So, in this episode, we will do a deep dive into the four new labor codes which became operational on November 21st, 2025. This is not just a legal update. This is the most significant structural reform of India's industrial rules since independence. We are going to break down how these codes, which unify 29 old laws, impact your salary, your job, security, and the future of the gig economy. Before 2025, if you were a factory manager, you were navigating a spaghetti bowl of regulations. Let's look at the three biggest problems the old system created. One is definitional anarchy. If I asked you what wage means, you would think it is simple, right? In the old system, wages was defined in 12 different ways across various acts. This led to endless confusion and litigation over how much employers should pay towards statutory liabilities like a PF or an ESI. And the second one was the growth trap. Now, this is the big one. Under the old Industrial Disputes Act, the IDA, if your company grew and hired more than 100 workers, you needed government permission to let people go or close your factory. Because this permission was rarely granted, many companies deliberately stayed small, under 100 employees, to retain flexibility. This growth trap restricted scaling. And the third, exclusionary scope. The modern digital world, the millions of people working for Uber or Swiggy or as freelancers, were completely invisible to the law. They had zero legal social protection. The new code aims to replace this restrictive policing model with a system based on facilitation and universal social security. Think of these four codes as four solid pillars replacing crumbling spaghetti bowl. 29 laws are now four main acts. First, the Code on Wages 2019. Now, this is all about the money, uniformity in pay definitions, minimum wages, and bonuses. The second one is Industrial Relations Code 2020. This focuses on flexibility, hiring, firing, and how companies deal with trade unions and strikes. The third one is Code on Social Security 2020. This is the safety net, the EPF, ESI, gratuity, and crucially, benefits for the gig economy. The fourth one is the OSHWC Code 2020. Now, this governs safety, health, and working hours, introducing concepts like the 4-day work week and night shifts for women. We'll start with the most impactful one for your wallet, which is the Code on Wages. For decades, companies played a financial trick. They structured your salary, what they call a CTC, so that your basic pay was very low, say 30%, and your allowances like HRA, conveyance, etc., were very high, 70%. Why? Because they only had to pay PF and the gratuity on that low basic pay, minimizing their long term liability. The new law, Section 2Y of the Code on Wages, ends that game with a 50% cap. So the rule is this: if the allowances, the exclusions, exceed 50% of your total CTC, the extra amount must be counted as wages for calculating benefits. The outcome? The government is forcing employers to put a significant amount of your pay into the core wages category, the basic pay, the DA. This means your compensation structure is now mandatory. 50% of your CTC must be defined as basic or DA. So, what is the financial impact? Let's look at the direct impact on your CTC, which is 1 lakh in the example. So, what is the change? Before, if your basic pay was only rupees 30,000, your company only paid PF contributions on that 30,000 rupees. Under the new code, they are forced to pay 50,000 rupees as the wage base for calculating the PF. So the win is this: your monthly PF contribution jumps significantly from 3,600 rupees to 6,000 rupees in this example. This means your retirement savings are substantially higher and your gratuity accruals increase. The immediate cost is this: because a larger chunk of your salary is being diverted into statutory savings like a PF, your immediate net take home pay will be lower. The trade off is clear: less cash in hand now, more security in the future. This wage definition change does not just affect PF, It triggers a cascading financial liability across the company's books. Gratuity is calculated as 15 days of wages for every completed year of service. If the wage base suddenly jumps from 30% to 50% of CTC, the total terminal payout liability for the company increases sharply. Companies must provision for this, meaning their balance sheet liability for gratuity will see a sharp spike in fiscal year 2025-2026. Let's talk about leave encashment. When you exit the company, your accumulated leave encashment, which is often tied to basic salary, will now be calculated on this higher mandated wage base. This means a higher cash outflow for employers when employees leave. Beyond PF, the code on wages is a huge win for wage fairness, especially for workers in unorganized sectors. The central government will set a floor wage, a national baseline that no state can go below. State governments then need to set their own minimum wages, which must be higher than this floor wage. Then, in the past, minimum wages only applied to scheduled employment, listed industries like mining or construction. That concept is now removed. Now, every employee in any sector is entitled to the minimum wage. This is enormous for small retail or service outlets. The code institutionalizes the variable dearness allowance or VDA. This mechanism allows minimum wages to be revised automatically twice a year based on the consumer price index, the CPI. That guarantees that inflation won't immediately erode the real income of the lowest paid workers. If you work in HR or finance, this is the operational nightmare, the 48-hour full and final settlement. Previously, when an employee resigned, the full and final settlement took 30 to 45 days. Why? Because they had to clear the assets, calculate the taxes, and get sign offs. Here is the new rule: wages owed to an employee who has been dismissed, retrenched, or has resigned must be paid within 2 working days of the last day of employment, that is 48 hours. This acceleration demands a complete overhaul of internal payroll and clearance processes. Imagine having to recover a laptop, calculate 3 months of variable pay, and ensure tax deduction compliance all in 2 days. Companies that fail to meet this aggressive timelines face serious penalties for non-compliance. Let's talk about how this new code is formalizing the gig economy. Now, moving to the Social Security Code, this is where India catches up with the 21st century. For the first time, Indian law legally recognizes millions of gig workers like freelancers and platform workers like your Swiggy or your Zomato delivery partners. How will the benefits be funded? Through the aggregator Levy. Aggregators, the digital platforms, must contribute to a social security fund. The contribution rate is between a 1% to 2% of the aggregator's annual turnover, that is capped at 5% of the total amount to the workers. This levy is a direct hit to the profits of these companies, forcing them to recognize these workers as stakeholders entitled to benefits rather than just independent contractors. They may pass this cost on to you, the consumers, via a regulatory surcharge. Let's talk about the gratuity. The Social Security Code also radically changes benefits for full time employees hired on a fixed term contract, which is FTE. The old rule was this: previously, you generally needed 5 years of continuous service to be eligible for gratuity. The new rule: fixed term employees are now entitled to gratuity if they render service for just 1 year. The payment is calculated pro rata. So, what is the strategic implication? Now, this is a boon for project based hiring. Employers can use the FTE model for flexibility, knowing they have direct control over quality, unlike contract labor. But they must now accept the statutory cost of providing gratuity from the first year. The employee's state insurance, the ESI, scheme, which provides health and sickness benefits, is getting a massive upgrade. First, it's going to have a pan India coverage. The map of ESI facilities is being fully covered. The old distinction between notified and non notified districts is removed, ensuring ESI benefits are available nationwide. 2. For hazardous industries. If your establishment is involved in hazardous work, ESI coverage is mandatory, even if you employ just one worker. 3. Voluntary opt-in. So small business, those with fewer than 10 employees, can now voluntarily opt into the ESI scheme. This is vital because it allows MSMEs to offer competitive health benefits to retain good talent. Now we shift to the Industrial Relations Code. designed to fix the growth trap we discussed earlier. This is the liberalization pillar. So the problem was this: the old law required government permission to lay off staff if you hit 100 workers, paralyzing growth. The reform, the IR code, raises the threshold to 300 workers. Establishments with up to 299 workers can now retrench staff or close down simply by paying severance without bureaucratic interference. So, what is the economic impact? This is a game changer for micro, small, and medium enterprises, the MSMEs. It encourages them to scale up, hire more people, and invest without the fear of being locked into a rigid labor structure during an economic downturn. Now, this code also focuses on reducing chaos caused by fragmented trade unions and wildcat strikes. So, let's talk about sole negotiating agents, the 51% rule. No more fighting between three unions claiming to represent the workers. The code mandates that a union must demonstrate support from 51% or more of the workers to be recognized as a sole negotiating agent. If no one hits 51%, a negotiating council is formed, forcing unity. The reinforcement for 14-day notice before a strike is now extended to all industrial establishments, not just public utilities. This creates a legal blockade against flash strikes and compels negotiations. The code closes a loophole using concerted casual leave by 50% or more workers to halt production without formally calling a strike is now legally considered a strike. Still, the IR code made it easier for smaller companies under 300 staff to retrench workers. It introduces a necessary balance through the worker reskilling fund. So there is a mandatory contribution. When a company retrenches a worker, the employer must contribute an amount equal to 15 days of the last drawn wages of that worker into this fund. This amount is credited directly to the worker's account. It is designed to provide financial support when the worker looks for new employment or invests in upskilling, acting as a secondary layer of severance pay. This balances industrial flexibility with social safety. Finally, we look at the OSHWC code, which stands for Occupational Safety, Health, and Working Conditions, which is modernizing the concept of the workday. So let's talk about the 4-day work week first. The weekly limit remains 48 hours, but the code allows for 12-hour workday. Doing the math, 12 hours times 4 days, which is 48 hours, this allows companies, particularly in IT or continuous manufacturing, to implement a 4-day work week with 3 rest days, providing the employee consents. Then we have night shift liberalization for women. Legacy rules restricting women from night shifts are gone. Women are now entitled to work in any establishment at any time, 7 p.m. to 6 a.m. The crucial condition is that the employer must ensure strict safety protocols, including providing safe transport. This is a huge step for gender diversity in sectors like manufacturing and BPOs. Let's talk about overtime calculation protocols. Now, this is a technical but expensive detail for business on how overtime is calculated. The old way was this: some companies used to divide your monthly salary by 30 days to get your daily rate, which was low. The new norm clarifies that the divisor for calculating the hourly rate for overtime must be 26 days. Why 26? Because that is the actual number of typical working days in a month. Since overtime pay is legally required to be twice the hourly rate, using 26 days instead of 30 mathematically results in a higher hourly rate, consequently increasing the total overtime payout required from the employer. So let's talk about the implementation, because that's where the story gets complicated. The labor is a concurrent list. Subject, meaning both the central government, which is the hub, and the state government, the spokes, have power to make rules. And there is a rules gap. The central codes are operational, but the vast majority of private sector establishments like factories, IT companies, are governed by state rules. Many states like Maharashtra still have key operational rules in the draft notification stage. Some states are pushing back. West Bengal has not even published draft rules, citing ideological opposition. Tamil Nadu is struggling to align the code on social security with its own robust existing welfare systems. If you work for a national company, HR must use a hub and spoke compliance model. Central definitions like wages, social security are the hub, but things like leave limits, minimum wages, and holidays are the spoke. customized according to each state's specific rules. The implementation of the four labor codes is not just a change, it's a structural reset. Now, what does this mean for India? For the employer, the era of complex, opaque, allowance heavy compensation structures is over. The new regime demands transparency, higher statutory contributions, and digital traceability. In return, employers get the freedom to scale, the 300 worker rule, flexibility in hiring, and protection from disruptive strikes. For the employee of the labor, this is a win win for security. You get a guaranteed universal minimum wage. Your retirement savings, your PF, your gratuity are significantly higher, and millions of gig workers now have a foundation for a social security workforce. The success of this reform now depends on how smoothly the states iron out their internal friction. If done right, these codes are the blueprint for driving the next phase of industrial growth by balancing the flexibility capital needs with the security labor deserves. Now, as a bonus, here are the 10 frequently asked questions or scenario based examples detailing the real world impact of the new labor laws drawing exclusively from the new code. So here we go. Here are all the bonus scenarios. So scenario number one, an IT sector employee currently has a salary structure where the base pay is 30% of the total CTC, and the remaining 70% comprises of various allowances like your HRA, your conveyance, special allowances. How will the new code on wages affect their take-home salary and future savings? So the answer is this. This structure is no longer compliant with the Code on Wages 2019, which introduces the 50% cap. Under the proviso to Section 2I, if the sum of all the allowances, the exclusions, exceed 50% of the total remuneration, the excess amount must be deemed as remuneration and added back to the wages for calculating statutory contributions like your provident fund and your gratuity. To avoid complex deeming calculations, most organizations are restructuring compensation so that the basic pay is aligned to 50% of your CTC. But think about the financial impact. The wage base used for PF and gratuity will be significantly higher. For example, moving from 30% to 50% of CTC. So go back to the example that we talked about earlier. This means the employee's retirement savings, the PF, and the terminal benefits, gratuity, will increase substantially. However, since a larger portion of the CTC is now being diverted into these mandatory savings, the employee's immediate net take-home pay will be lower. Scenario number two, a leading quick commerce company and aggregator operates across multiple cities. With the formalization of gig workers under the Code on Social Security, what new mandatory cost must the company budget for its delivery partners? So here is the answer. The Code on Social Security 2020 legally recognizes gig workers and mandates that aggregators must contribute to a social security fund to provide welfare for this segment. So what is the contribution mandate? The company must contribute an amount fixed between 1% to 2% of its annual turnover, subject to a maximum cap of 5% of the amount paid to the workers. What is your business model impact? This levy is a direct hit to the bottom line of platform companies, forcing them to recognize their workers as stakeholders entitled to benefits. The new law also suggests that these companies may choose to pass this increased cost to consumers via platform fee or regulatory surcharge. Furthermore, aggregators must also navigate potential dual compliance, such as the specific state welfare board and the transaction-based cess established by rules in states like Karnataka. Scenario number three, the 48-hour deadline. So an HR department is used to a 45-day cycle to finalize tax, computations, asset recoveries, and internal clearance, no dues, after an employee resigns. What operational changes must they implement to comply with the new Code on Wages? So the answer is this. The Code on Wages introduces a major operational compliance challenge regarding the full and final settlement. Wages payable to an employee who has resigned, who has been removed or dismissed or retrenched must be paid within 2 working days of their last day of work. 2 working days, 48 hours. So the operational necessity is this. The HR and the finance departments must drastically accelerate process for asset recovery, no dues clearance, and tax computation to meet this 48-hour window to avoid being non-compliant. So let's talk about scenario number 4. Successful manufacturing SME currently employs 150 workers and fears expanding beyond 200, concerned about being unable to downsize during an economic slowdown. How does the Industrial Relations Code change the growth strategy? So here's what you got to think about. The IR Code, Industrial Relations Code 2020, addresses this historical growth trap by addressing or by raising the threshold for requiring government permissions for retrenchment or plant closure. The old threshold of 100 workers is now raised to 300 workers, meaning establishments with up to 299 workers can now retrench staff or close down by merely paying the statutory governance severance compensation without government interference. This liberalization of hiring norms is expected to encourage MSMEs to scale up operations without the fear of being locked into an irreversible labor heavy structure. The code also empowers state governments to increase the threshold even further. Scenario number 5, a software firm hires an expert on a fixed term employment contract for an 18-month project. If the employee completes the full 18 months, are they entitled to gratuity even though they haven't completed 5 years of service? Yes, absolutely. Under the Code on Social Security 2020, FTEs are now entitled to gratuity if they render service for just 1 year. The payout is calculated on a pro rata basis. So the impact is this. This provision makes the FTE model more attractive for employers as it offers direct control over workforce quality while retaining flexibility. However, it comes with the mandatory statutory cost of providing gratuity from the first year, making FTEs a slightly more expensive proposition than before. Scenario number 6, a BPO, business process outsourcing company, serving international clients wants to implement a compressed work schedule where employees work longer hours but get 3 days off per week. Does the OSHWC code permit this? Absolutely, it does. The Occupational Safety, Health and Working Conditions Code 2020 introduces flexibility in the daily spread while maintaining the 48-hour workweek cap. The rule permits a 12-hour workday, provided the employee consents. Mathematically, 12 hours times 4 equals 48-hour limit. So this flexibility is highly relevant for the ITES sector and continuous process industries, enabling the potential implementation of a 4-day work week. Scenario number 7, a manufacturing unit needs its workers to put in a significant overtime during the peak holiday season. How does the OSHWC code change the way they calculate the cost of that overtime? The answer, the OSHWC code mandates a specific divisor for calculating the hourly rate used for overtime pay, which will increase the cost to the employer. So the new norm is this. The divisor used to determine the hourly rate must be 26 days, representing the actual working days in a month, aligning with judicial precedents. So what is the financial impact? Previously, some firms used a 30-day divisor. Since overtime pay is legally required to be double the hourly rate, using the 26-day divisor results in a mathematically higher hourly rate and consequently increases the total overtime payout required from the employer. Scenario number 8. Workers at a logistics hub want to protest a policy change by taking mass casual leave, intending to halt operations immediately. Can the management legally challenge this disruption under the new IR code? Yes. The IR code significantly tightens the norms surrounding industrial action, compelling parties to the negotiating table. The definition of strike is expected to include concerted casual leave on a given day by 50% or more workers, effectively closing this loophole used to disrupt production without formally declaring a strike. Furthermore, the requirement to give a 14-day notice before a strike is now extended to all industrial establishments, not just public utility services. Since conciliation proceedings start immediately upon the strike notice, this acts as a legal blockade against flash strikes. Next scenario, number 9. A construction company retrenches 50 workers due to the completion of a large project. Beyond the standard severance compensation, what additional contribution is now mandatory under the IR code? So to balance the easier retrenchment norms, the 300 worker rule, the IR code introduces the worker reskilling fund. The employer must contribute an amount equal to 15 days of the last drawn wages of every retrenched worker into this fund. And the purpose is this. The amount is credited directly to the worker's account, serving as a secondary layer of severance over and above the standard compensation. The fund is intended to support the worker while they seek new employment or upskilling opportunities. And the 10th scenario and the last one. A small retail unit in a non-listed industry has historically paid its staff below the prescribed minimum wage, arguing that minimum wage laws only apply to scheduled employments. Does the code on wages protect these workers? Absolutely yes. The Code on Wages 2019 mandates universal wage protection by removing the concept of scheduled employment. Previously, minimum wages applied only to listed industries. Now, every employee in any sector is entitled to the minimum wage, which the state government sets at or above the floor wage fixed by the central government. The wages will also be protected from inflation through the institutionalized variable dearness allowance (VDA) mechanism, requiring revisions twice a year based on the consumer price index. This will potentially raise the wage bill for the smallest units that previously operated under the radar. So those were the 10 scenarios that most people have questions about, and we thought it would be very helpful for the audience to understand what exactly those scenarios are and what the responses should be in the new code. With that, we come to the end of the show. Please support our work by joining us as a member. And thank you so much for watching. If you learned anything from this video, please like, share, and subscribe to the AI with Arun show. Thank you for watching, and we will be right back soon.